Hello, everyone. So glad to have you with us here at Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, and we're coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. The United States shrinks its military presence in Syria, reducing the number of bases from 3 to 1 as the Trump administration recalibrates ties with Damascus under interim leader al-Jilani. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development slashes its global growth forecast for 2025 to 2.9%, down from 3.1%, warning trade tensions will drag down the world economy. Exit polls show South Korea's Lee Jae-myung likely winning the presidential election, replacing former leader Yoon Suk-yeol, who shot martial law move last December threw the country into political chaos. Erin Patterson, an Australian woman on trial for allegedly killing 3 relatives for serving lunch, tells the court her dish did contain death cap mushrooms, but says the majority of the others were bought from a local store. Uganda says it shot what it calls 2 armed terrorists in Kampala just days before the country's annual Martyrs' Day. The operation followed reports of a possible bomb explosion. We began with the latest peace talks between Russia and Ukraine that took place in Istanbul yesterday, and the talks lasted for just over an hour. Now, no ceasefire came out of the second round of discussions between both sides, but what they did agree on was a large-scale prisoner exchange under which 12,000 troops would be returned.
On release of prisoners of war, we agreed to focus on specific categories rather than numbers. We agreed to exchange all for all, seriously wounded and seriously sick prisoners of war. Second category is young soldiers who are from 18 to 25 years old, all for all. Also, we agreed to return 6,000 to 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers.
White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said that President Trump is open to meeting both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky if that's what it would require for the conflict to end.
The Turkish president is suggesting that it's high time that leaders, President Erdogan, President Trump, President Putin and President Zelensky meet in Istanbul. Is that something that President Trump would support and would be partaking?
Well, the president has said he's open to it if it comes to that, but he wants both of these leaders and both sides to sit down at the table together. And we saw them do that at the urging of President Trump today.
President Erdogan of Turkey has also proposed hosting a 3-way summit between President Trump, Putin, and Zelensky in Istanbul or Ankara later this month. But so far, it's just Zelensky who has shown a willingness for a trilateral meeting, and Putin has also refused to take part.
I would like to bring together both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky in Istanbul or Ankara in the same, and even take Donald Trump with them. If they accept, I would like to come together with them in this meeting and thus turn Istanbul into a peace center. We will take steps towards this after this last meeting.
Now, according to Ukraine, Russia has rejected calls for an unconditional ceasefire and instead offered a ceasefire only in a few areas of the front line without giving any specifics. Moscow said it would agree to a complete ceasefire only if Kyiv's troops pulled back from 4 regions that were annexed by Russia in a 2022 referendum and are partially under the control of Russian forces. The Kremlin's demands don't just end there. It also wants a permanent ban on Ukraine's NATO membership, military downscaling, and a halt to Western weapons supplied to Kyiv. And at least 20% of Ukrainian territory has now been seized by Russia, including the Crimean Peninsula, which Moscow annexed in the year 2014. President Zelensky, who is banking on the president, urged him to force Russia into agreeing to a full-scale ceasefire by imposing more sanctions. He also hit back, calling Russia's partial truce offer idiotic, adding that the whole point of a ceasefire is to stop the loss of lives.
Therefore, it is very important for us to emphasize once again, as we did during our last conversation with President Trump, that if Istanbul fails to make progress on the ceasefire this time, strong measures must be taken by the United States, primarily a package of sanctions.
Now, just days before these talks, Ukraine launched a major drone strike deep inside Russia, targeting its warplanes, and it claimed to have damaged 34% of Russian strategic bombers. The Ukrainian president wants more pressure put on Russia, but the Russian president is not willing to bow down or make any concessions. Meanwhile, the president has also claimed to end the war in 24 hours during his presidential campaign, stands distant from fulfilling his promise. And while talks go on, the fighting on the ground has shown no signs of abating. Which way will the Ukraine conflict tilt now? Diplomacy or dogfight? And now moving to the Middle East, where nuclear tensions are once again flaring, and this time the stakes may be higher than ever. Yesterday, President Trump made a hardline declaration on Iran's nuclear program, ruling out any uranium enrichment under a potential new nuclear agreement. Now, posting on his Truth Social platform, the commander-in-chief wrote, quote, "Under our potential agreement, we will not allow any enrichment or uranium," end quote. President Trump's statement came shortly after Axios reported that the U.S. proposal might allow Tehran limited low-level enrichment, a claim President Trump directly rejected. Now, the latest U.S. proposal, reportedly delivered to Tehran by Omani foreign minister, suggests that Iran halt uranium enrichment entirely and consider joining a regional consortium for peaceful nuclear energy development. However, President Trump's envoy to the talks, Steve Witkoff, reaffirmed Washington's position, stating, quote, "An enrichment program can never exist in the state of Iran ever again. That's our red line," end quote.
President Trump has made it clear that Iran can never obtain a nuclear bomb. Special Envoy Witkoff has sent a detailed and acceptable proposal to the Iranian regime, and it's in their best interest to accept it. Out of respect for the ongoing deal, the administration will not comment on details of the proposal to the media.
But despite the renewed push for diplomacy, Iran remains firm in its position. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi dismissed the U.S. offer as unbalanced and unacceptable, warning that no agreement will be reached if Iran's peaceful nuclear activities are curtailed. In fact, even Iran's foreign ministry called a recent report by the United Nations nuclear watchdog on its nuclear activities fully biased and politically motivated.
The content of the report issued by the IAEA is mostly repetitive, and it exaggerates some technical issues. We have no doubt that this report has been prepared under pressure by some certain European countries. Of course, this won't justify preparing a fully biased and politically motivated report against a member country.
Meanwhile, the core sticking points in the negotiations remain unchanged. On one hand, Tehran refuses to stop enrichment entirely or ship out its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, while in return it demands a full lifting of U.S. sanctions, particularly those affecting its vital oil and banking sectors. In fact, according to Iranian sources, Washington's offer lacks a clear roadmap for sanction relief, which is a key Iranian demand. A senior diplomat close to Iran's negotiating team said the current proposal is a non-starter and completely one-sided.
Iran is drafting a negative response to the U.S. proposal, which could be interpreted as a rejection of the U.S. offer. In this proposal, the U.S. stance on enrichment on Iranian soil remains unchanged, and there is no clear explanation regarding the lifting of sanctions.
Meanwhile, Egypt and other regional players have called for de-escalation to prevent further destabilization. Egyptian President al-Sisi praised the diplomatic talks but warned against any military confrontation, a sentiment echoed by his foreign minister, who emphasized the region is already dealing with enough crises. Even Saudi Arabia, behind the scenes, has reportedly urged Tehran to take Washington's offer seriously, viewing it as a possible path to avoid direct conflict with Israel, which continues to regard Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat. Tehran's response to the proposal is expected soon, But with hardened positions, unresolved demands, and regional players watching closely, the key question remains, will diplomacy prevail, or is the region inching toward something far more dangerous? And continuing in the Middle East, tensions continue to rise as Yemen's Houthi rebels launched yet another missile towards Israel on Monday, targeting Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv. The Israeli military confirmed it successfully intercepted the missile, which triggered sirens across several regions, including Jerusalem and central Israel.
Following the sirens that sounded a short while ago in several areas in Israel, a missile launched from Yemen was intercepted.
Now, this marks another escalation in the Houthi campaign, which has involved repeated drone and missile strikes on Israeli territory since the war in Gaza began back in October of 2023. Houthi military spokesperson confirmed in a video statement that the group's missile forces had launched a hypersonic ballistic missile at the airport. He claimed the operation had been successful, forcing the temporary closure of the airport and sending millions of Israelis into shelters. He also stated that 3 drones were launched at separate Israeli cities, Tel Aviv, Ashdod, and Eilat.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation targeting Eilat Airport, Israeli-named Ben Gurion Airport, in the occupied area of Jaffa, using a hypersonic ballistic missile. The operation successfully achieved its goal, forcing millions of occupying Zionists to flee to shelters and halting air traffic at the airport.
The Houthi spokesperson further said that the group's goal is to impose a full ban on air traffic at Ben Gurion Airport following what he called a partial ban achieved through Monday's operation.
They will also confront every Israeli aggression against our country with further supportive operations for the oppressed Palestinian people, including the continued ban on Israeli air traffic to and from Eilat Airport. The Yemeni armed forces assure all our faithful and struggling Yemeni people that they will continue to fulfill their religious, moral, and humanitarian duty toward our people in Palestine until the aggression against them stops and the siege is lifted.
And while the missile was intercepted and no casualties were in fact reported, the attempted strike still had a major impact. Israeli media reported that airport operations were temporarily halted for both takeoffs and landings during the attack. This also marked the second such interception in just 2 days. On Sunday, another missile from Yemen was also intercepted. And since March 18th, at least 49 missiles have reportedly been launched from Yemen toward Israel, according to Israeli media. And while most have been intercepted successfully, however, one missile in early May did manage to land within the perimeter of the airport, raising concerns about the reach and precision of the Houthis' capabilities. And in response to the Houthi strikes, Israel has carried out several air raids in Yemen. Now, these retaliatory strikes have reportedly targeted key infrastructure, including ports and the airport in the capital, Sana'a. With missile threats continuing to emerge from Yemen and Israeli retaliation growing more aggressive, the situation remains highly volatile. In fact, both sides show no sign of stepping back, and as the war in Gaza drags on, another major question now looms over the Middle East. What happens if one of these missiles gets through once again? Paris, known for its romance and art, woke up to a political thriller this week. In an extraordinary act of protest, Greenpeace activists snatched President Emmanuel Macron's wax figure from the Grevin Museum and planted it outside the Russian embassy. Disguised as tourists, they pulled off the heist in broad daylight. No alarms, no arrests, just a clear message. France cannot fight for Ukraine while fueling Russia's energy profits. What comes next? Will the president respond, or will his wax double continue speaking louder? Our next report delves deeper.
It was a quiet Monday morning in Paris. Tourists wandered through the Grevin Museum, marveling at wax legends from Charlie Chaplin to Napoleon. But among the many explorers, one group wasn't there for sightseeing. Dressed like everyday visitors, a few Greenpeace activists strolled casually through the halls. Their target stood silently under the museum lights: French President Emmanuel Macron. immortalized in wax and worth over $45,000. But what happened next felt like a scene from a political heist film. In a flash, jackets came off and uniforms appeared. With a blanket wrapped around Macron's wax figure, the group then moved fast through an emergency exit where a car was waiting, engine running. In less than 5 minutes, the president had vanished. Paris woke up to confusion. The museum hadn't seen it coming. Security was left blinking at security footage. And Macron, he was no longer in the museum. He was standing, eerily lifelike, outside the Russian embassy. The stunt was bold, but it was no prank. This was a protest, a sharp, calculated message aimed directly at the French government.
So this morning, we borrowed the wax statue of Emmanuel Macron from the Grevin Museum. We took it out of the museum, took it with us, and then symbolically displayed it in front of the Russian embassy to denounce the double standards of the French government and the president, Macron, regarding the war in Ukraine.
Beneath the statue, placards screamed hypocrisy. Support Ukraine, but fund Russia. And business is business. The wax figure stood expressionless, surrounded by slogans and questions which the real Macron has yet to answer. Greenpeace didn't just want to make a scene, they wanted to make a point. France, they argued, was playing both sides. Publicly, Macron champions Ukraine. He speaks loudly at summits.
And we have to increase the coordination with the US, taking as a basis what Lindsey Graham put on the table, but a strong...
Calls for sanctions, sends military aid, but behind closed doors, billions allegedly flow the other way.
We do not deny the political, diplomatic, and financial support of France and Europe for Ukraine. But if we want to be coherent and consistent, we cannot, on the one hand, support Ukraine and, on the other, continue to import such massive amounts of gas, chemical fertilizers, and uranium.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, the Kremlin has made $973 billion from fossil fuels, and France contributed a staggering $20.4 billion, despite sanctions, despite outrage. Greenpeace called this a double game, supporting Ukraine on the world stage while helping fund the aggressor in practice. Macron, they said, embodies this double discourse.
That's not all. The French don't know this. However, it's a reality. We continue to finance the Russian war effort through these imports, which amount to billions of euros. We're not talking about trivial matters.
Now, amid the disappearance, the Grevin Museum remained silent. The presidency didn't comment. In fact, even no arrests were made. And the wax statue? Well, it's still missing from its glass pedestal. We'll return him, Greenpeace said, but not just yet. The question now is simple. Will the real Emmanuel Macron make a move before his wax twin does?
And finally, we end with ongoing layoffs in the tech industry. With fresh job cuts after the 6,000 announced last month, Microsoft's layoff spree seems to be far from over. As the tech giant doubles down on artificial intelligence, hundreds of more employees are being shown the door. This is raising fresh concerns about whether the AI boom is creating more jobs or quietly wiping them out. Here's our report on the unfolding shakeup in Silicon Valley.
Microsoft has laid off over 300 more employees. This comes just weeks after executing one of its largest workforce reductions in years. This continues as a sweeping effort to realign itself in an AI-dominated marketplace. According to a filing with Washington State's Employment Security Department, the tech giant informed over 300 employees that their roles have been eliminated. This comes on top of the 6,000 layoffs announced in May, many of which affected long-serving software engineers and employees deeply embedded in key projects. In a statement, a Microsoft spokesman confirmed the latest round of job cuts.
A layoff announcement.
The spokesperson stated that the jobs represent less than 1% of Microsoft's global workforce. This is a part of the ongoing organizational changes necessary to best position the company for success in a dynamic marketplace. The cuts reflect a broader trend in the tech industry. Companies are tightening their belts even as they invest heavily in artificial intelligence. Microsoft, along with rivals like Meta and Salesforce, has championed AI tools that enhance software development while reducing the need for human coders. The internal deployment of such technologies has allowed firms to slow hiring or reduce staff, citing efficiency gains. According to reports as of June 2024, Microsoft employed roughly 228,000 full-time workers globally, 55% of whom are based out of the United States of America. The latest round of layoffs pushes the total number of Microsoft job losses in Washington state alone to nearly 2,300 in recent weeks. Microsoft isn't the only company that has cut jobs. As per reports, over 62,000 tech jobs have been eliminated across 137 companies in 2025. Google reportedly bid adieu to nearly 200 employees from its global business unit. Amazon has reportedly cut about 27,000 jobs since 2022. Panasonic is also planning to slash over 10,000 roles. IBM has reportedly let go of around 8,000 employees. Online reactions have ranged from economic concern to geopolitical blame. Social media users vented frustration, with many blaming AI and H-1B visas. One user stated that efficiency over expansion is the new trend. Another lamented that recession is already here, while one stated that these job cuts have nothing to do with rate cuts. Microsoft has not specified which departments were most affected in the latest cuts, but industry watchers suspect the trend of targeting of software engineering roles may have continued. As big tech leans further into automation and machine learning, analysts warn that entry-level tech jobs may soon face extinction, unless companies rethink the human role in AI-driven industries.
That's going to do it for us today. We certainly thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
$36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI,
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion kakarjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese,
4 兆ドル以上の
Portuguese,
por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select the language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.